"What the hell do you think you're doing, Amara?" Eleanor Whitmore's voice cracked like a whip through the elegant dining hall, freezing the soft clinking of silverware and the polite murmurs of conversation. The guests, mid-laugh, immediately went silent, shocked by her words, sharp and venomous. But it wasn't just the words. It was the sudden, brutal motion that followed. Eleanor's gloved fingers grabbed the front of Amara's blouse and, with a violent pull, ripped it straight down the middle. The room gasped in unison. Wine glasses trembled, napkins fell. Amara's hands flew to her chest, her face burning with shock and humiliation. "You thought no one would notice?" Eleanor seethed, her eyes narrowing at the small gold necklace now swinging at Amara's chest. "Wearing that like you belong here, walking around this room with your head held high as if you've earned your place." Amara stood frozen, but then from across the room, Lucas Whitmore, her lover and the heir to Whitmore Enterprises, stood helplessly. His voice trembled, but his family's harsh gaze silenced him before he could speak. And then suddenly, the silence was broken by CEO Edward Whitmore, Lucas's father, standing up with authority. His voice rang out across the room, strong and unwavering. "Enough!" he shouted, glaring at his wife. "You will not treat her this way, Eleanor. Not in my house. What would you do if you were Lucas in this situation? Would you stand up for the person you love, or remain silent? Let us know in the comments below. And if you're moved by this story, please don't forget to like and subscribe for more emotional, powerful narratives like this one. Hit the bell icon so you won't miss a single moment. Now let us begin. It was a night that was supposed to be like any other at the Whitmore mansion, an evening of polite conversation, fine wine, and the mingling of high society guests. Eleanor Whitmore, the proud matriarch of the family, had spent the past week preparing for this dinner. The guests were elite businessmen, powerful investors, and socialites, all eager to bask in the grandeur of the Whitmore estate. Lucas Whitmore, their son, the CEO of Whitmore Enterprises, had invited them over to discuss the future of the family business. But beneath the polished silverware and crystal glasses, beneath the layers of luxury and calm smiles, there was a storm quietly brewing. Amara Williams, the maid of the household, was the storm's quiet center. For years, she had worked tirelessly, unseen and unheard, attending to the Whitmore family's every need. She had learned to blend into the background. That was the unspoken rule in the Whitmore household. The maids, the servants, they were meant to stay in the shadows, ensuring everything ran smoothly without drawing attention to themselves. But Lucas had seen her. And more than that, he had loved her. Against the wishes of his mother, against the sneers of his family, he had chosen Amara. He had defied every expectation placed on him as heir to the Whitmore empire. The necklace, an heirloom passed down through generations, was given to Amara as a symbol of his love, a sign of their bond despite the world's expectations. The necklace had been Lucas's gift, a declaration of their shared future, one he desperately hoped would survive the obstacles they would inevitably face. For the occasion, Lucas bought Amara a beautiful red gown, something stunning, something that would make her shine in the crowd. He wanted her to feel special, to not be bound by the role his family had forced upon her. But Amara, scared and hesitant, couldn't bring herself to wear it. "I can't," she whispered, shaking her head as she held the gown in her hands. "Your family. They'll never accept me like this." Lucas, hurt but understanding, tried to reassure her. "You're beautiful, Amara. You deserve to wear this gown, to stand tall beside me, not hidden away in that uniform." But Amara shook her head again, the fear evident in her eyes. "I'm just a maid to them, Lucas. I can't pretend to be someone else, not in front of your mother. Please let me stay as I am." She wore the necklace, the gift Lucas had given her. It sparkled at her neck, a symbol of their bond, but the rest of her was still cloaked in the black and white maid's uniform. It was the only armor she could wear to face the Whitmore family's judgment. The grand dining room was alive with the sounds of conversation, the clink of silverware, and the soft hum of polite laughter. Eleanor Whitmore, sitting at the head of the table, cast a pointed glance at Amara as she moved silently around the room, serving guests. The whispers of disapproval were always there, the subtle judgments masked by smiles and pleasantries. Eleanor's eyes followed Amara, narrowing as she noticed the necklace at her throat. It caught the light, and for a moment, the shimmer was all that could be seen. "What is that?" Eleanor's voice cut through the noise like a knife, her eyes narrowing as she stared at the necklace, her words filled with venom. Amara froze, her breath catching in her throat. She hadn't expected the necklace to draw attention. She hadn't expected it to be anything more than a small token of Lucas's love, but to Eleanor, it was an offense. Eleanor stood from the table, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. The room fell silent. "Where did you get that necklace?" Eleanor's voice cracked like a whip, her anger barely contained. "Who gave it to you?" Amara opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Lucas was watching, standing at the table, his heart sinking as his mother's rage rose. "It was me," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, but Eleanor's fury drowned him out. "You think you can wear this necklace like you belong here?" Eleanor seethed, storming toward Amara. Her hand shot out and grabbed the front of Amara's blouse. With one violent motion, Eleanor tore the blouse down the middle, exposing Amara's satin undergarments and the small gold necklace swinging from her neck. Gasps filled the room. The guests, stunned and silent, watched in disbelief as Eleanor humiliated Amara in front of them. Amara's hands flew to her chest, her face flushed with humiliation. The room fell into a heavy silence, broken only by the sharp sound of Eleanor's voice. "You think you can walk in here, wear this necklace like you belong here, strut around with your head held high as if you've earned your place?" Eleanor hissed, looking down at Amara with disgust. "You're nothing but a servant, and you'll never be anything more." Amara stood frozen, the weight of Eleanor's words crashing down on her like a tidal wave. Her body trembled, but she didn't answer. She couldn't. Lucas stood, his chair scraping across the floor with a loud noise, but it was too late. Eleanor's cruelty had already done its damage. His heart pounded in his chest as he crossed the room to Amara, his mind racing. "Enough, mother!" he shouted, his voice trembling with a mix of anger and hurt. But before Lucas could say another word, Edward Whitmore, his father, rose from his seat. The man who had remained silent the entire evening, absorbed in his thoughts and business, now stood with a sudden and commanding presence. His chair scraped loudly against the floor as he strode across the room, his steps heavy with authority. "Enough, Eleanor." Edward's voice rang out across the room, deep and unwavering. "This has gone far enough. You have no right to treat Amara this way." The room went silent. Eleanor froze, her eyes widening as she turned to face her husband. It was the first time in years that Edward had stepped in to challenge her in this way. The guests stood frozen, unsure how to react. Eleanor tried to regain her composure, her voice low and furious. "She's nothing but a maid, Edward. She doesn't belong in this family. You're letting this distraction tear apart everything we've worked for." But Edward, unmoved, turned his gaze to Lucas, who stood by Amara, his face flushed with both anger and relief. "Lucas is a grown man, Eleanor," Edward said, his voice now softer but filled with conviction. "If this is the woman he chooses, then you will respect that, or I'll no longer stand by and let you tear this family apart." The Whitmore mansion was eerily quiet after the dinner. The grand halls, usually filled with the sound of soft chatter and laughter, now felt hollow. The guests had left, the extravagant dinner was over, and yet the weight of the evening lingered, heavy in the air. The confrontation between Eleanor and Amara had left a deep scar, one that Lucas couldn't ignore. Amara, still in her black and white maid's uniform, sat in the small kitchen, her hands clenched tightly around a mug of tea, the warmth doing little to ease the coldness that had settled in her chest. She could still feel the sting of Eleanor's words, the ripping of her blouse, the humiliation in front of the guests. She didn't dare look at the necklace hanging around her neck. It felt like a weight now, no longer a symbol of love but a reminder of how deeply she didn't belong in this world. The door creaked open, and Lucas stepped in, his face pale, his expression unreadable. He walked slowly toward her, but as his gaze met hers, he saw the familiar pain in her eyes. The same pain that had haunted them both since the beginning. The pain of being forced to hide their love, of being forced to pretend they were something they weren't. Without a word, Lucas sat across from her, his hand reaching out to gently touch hers. He wanted to speak, to apologize, to say everything that was on his mind. But nothing came. How could he apologize for a life he had no control over? How could he make her understand that his silence in the face of his family's cruelty wasn't out of apathy, but out of fear? Amara, feeling the warmth of his touch, slowly raised her gaze to meet his. "I never asked for this, Lucas," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I never asked to be part of your world. I only wanted to work, to serve, to stay in the background. But now, I feel like I've been torn apart. I feel like I'm nothing. Lucas squeezed her hand, his chest tightening. You're everything to me, Amara. Everything. I never meant for you to be treated like this. I promised you that I would protect you, but my own mother, my own family, they don't see you. They don't see us. Amara shook her head, tears welling in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. They'll never see me, Lucas. They'll never see someone like me. She paused, taking a deep breath, trying to steady herself. You need to make a choice. I can't keep pretending that I belong here when I know I never will. Her words cut through him like a blade, but Lucas couldn't argue. He knew that Amara was right. He had spent so much of his life trying to keep the peace, trying to please his family, but at what cost? He loved Amara, but every day, he had to hide that love, to shield her from the wrath of his mother, and for what? So that his family could continue to live in the illusion of control? His mind drifted to the moment when his father, Edward Whitmore, had stood up in defense of Amara. It had been the first time in years that Lucas had seen his father take a stand, not in the boardroom, but for something that truly mattered. Edward had broken the silence, challenging Eleanor, and for the first time, Lucas felt a sense of relief. But that relief was short-lived. Eleanor's cruelty had already done its damage. I can't keep living like this, Lucas said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. I can't keep trying to appease everyone at the expense of the one thing that actually makes me happy. Amara nodded, understanding the depth of his words. The tension between them, between love and family duty, had been building for months. She had never wanted to be a burden to him, never wanted to stand in the way of his future, but the constant rejection, the silent battles, the cruel jabs, it was breaking her. Then we need to leave, Lucas. We need to go somewhere where we can be free to love each other without fear. His heart ached at the thought. He had always known this day would come, but he wasn't ready. He wasn't ready to leave everything he had worked for. But he also wasn't ready to lose Amara. Before he could respond, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway. The door to the kitchen opened, and Edward Whitmore stepped inside. His expression was unreadable, but his presence in the room spoke volumes. Lucas met his father's gaze, and for a moment, everything felt heavy with unspoken words. Edward looked at Amara, then at Lucas, before speaking. I've thought about what happened earlier. I know I should have intervened sooner. Eleanor, she's always been controlling, always believing her version of what the Whitmore name should be. But this family, this empire, it's bigger than her. It's bigger than all of us. And if it costs me everything to see my son happy, then I'll gladly give it up. Lucas's eyes widened, his heart racing. He had never expected his father to say this. You mean it? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Edward nodded, a rare softness in his eyes. I do. You don't have to choose between love and family, Lucas. I should have made that clear a long time ago. But it's not too late. You and Amara deserve the chance to build your own life, without fear, without the shadows of this family hanging over you. Amara looked at Edward, overwhelmed with gratitude, but still uncertain. But what about your wife, your family? How can you stand up to her? Edward smiled faintly, a look of determination crossing his face. Because this family is mine to lead. And I will protect what's important. The following days in the Whitmore household were strained, every moment a reminder of the tension that hung heavy between the family and Amara. Lucas had spent hours in his office, wrestling with his decisions, as the weight of his family's expectations pressed down on him. He had always known that his mother's disapproval was inevitable, but Eleanor's cruelty, that he had never anticipated. And now, with his father's unexpected support, he was faced with a new dilemma. Could he truly leave everything behind? Could he walk away from a life that had been mapped out for him since birth? Meanwhile, Amara kept to herself. She had tried to focus on her work, keeping her head down and avoiding the judgmental stares that still lingered from the dinner. The embarrassment of that night, when Eleanor had torn her blouse, still stung. But it was not just the physical pain that hurt. It was the realization that, no matter how much Lucas loved her, there was no place for her in his world. The world his family had built for him was one of privilege, power, and reputation, none of which included someone like her. One evening, after a long day filled with endless calls and meetings, Lucas found himself standing in the study, staring out the window at the sprawling estate. He had always thought of the mansion as his home, a place of comfort and security. But now, it felt like a gilded cage. The walls that had once protected him now seemed to confine him, keeping him trapped in a life he no longer wanted. The soft click of the door opening broke his reverie. Edward, his father, entered, closing the door gently behind him. The older man's face was solemn, but there was a quiet resolve in his eyes. "Lucas," he said, his voice low, but filled with a weight of understanding. "Have you thought about what comes next?" Lucas turned to face him, his heart beating faster. "I don't know, Dad. I've spent my whole life building up to this. I've been training for this position, for the responsibilities that come with it. But now, I don't know if I can keep going like this. I don't know if I can keep pretending that everything is okay, when it's not." Edward nodded, his expression softening. "I know. I see the struggle in you, Lucas. And I want you to understand, this life, this business, it's all yours to take. But your happiness, your peace, they matter more than anything else. Don't lose yourself trying to please others, especially those who don't care about you, about what you truly want." The words hit Lucas like a thunderclap. For the first time in his life, he saw his father not just as a business leader, but as a man who understood the weight of love and sacrifice. "Amara means everything to me, Dad," Lucas whispered. "But I don't know if I'm strong enough to fight for her. I don't know if I'm strong enough to walk away from everything we've built." Edward stepped closer, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "Then we'll build something new. If you choose her, if you choose to follow your heart, you will have my support. And you will have the future you want." Lucas swallowed hard, the weight of his father's words settling over him like a warm blanket. For the first time, he felt a sense of clarity. "I want to be with her. But I don't know how." Edward smiled gently. "You don't have to do it alone. I'll help you. But remember, sometimes, the hardest thing to do is also the most rewarding." As the days passed, Amara tried to hold herself together, but it was becoming increasingly difficult. Eleanor's treatment of her hadn't eased. In fact, it had only grown colder, more pointed. Amara knew she was a source of tension in the house. She could see it in the way Eleanor and the other family members looked at her. The judgment, the disdain, was palpable. And still, Lucas stood by her. But the fear that had once kept her in line, the fear of being nothing more than a servant, a shadow in Lucas's life, was starting to fade. She had spent her life taking up as little space as possible, keeping her head down, obeying the rules that had been set for her. But now, she found herself standing taller. The necklace around her neck, a gift from Lucas, now felt like more than just a token of love. It was a sign of her strength, her courage to keep going despite everything. One night, as she stood alone in the garden, looking up at the stars, she made a decision. She wouldn't let fear rule her anymore. She wouldn't allow Eleanor or anyone else to make her feel small. She had Lucas's love, and that was worth fighting for. The next day, Eleanor was seated in the grand parlor, sipping tea, as she stared out the window, a look of disapproval on her face. Amara, still in her maid's uniform, entered the room, her heart pounding in her chest. She had come to face Eleanor, to speak her truth. "I can't keep living like this, Eleanor," Amara said, her voice steady, but filled with emotion. "I won't be treated like a servant in my own home. I won't let you control me." Eleanor looked up, her lips curling into a sneer. "You think you have any power here?" she hissed. "You're nothing but a maid, Amara. You'll never be part of this family, and you'll never be good enough for my son." Amara stood tall, holding Lucas's necklace tightly in her hand. "I'm more than what you think of me," she replied. "And Lucas loves me, not for the life I was born into, but for who I am. And that's something you can't take away from us." The following days felt like a blur to Lucas. He knew the path ahead was fraught with uncertainty, but after his father's words of encouragement, something had shifted within him. For the first time, he wasn't weighed down by the burden of family legacy. The idea of his family's expectations, once a constant source of fear and anxiety, no longer held the same power over him. His decision was clear. He wanted Amara. He would no longer hide their love in the shadows, and he would no longer let Eleanor's cruelty define his future. However, the road to freedom was never easy, especially when it involved turning his back on the family that had molded him. Amara, too, had been wrestling with her own fears. She had spent her life in servitude, living in the background, keeping her head down, never daring to dream of a life that was hers to control. But as the days passed, She found herself standing taller, stronger. The conversations she had with Lucas had ignited something in her, a deep sense of worth that she had never allowed herself to acknowledge. But the idea of standing against Eleanor, against the family that Lucas was bound to, filled her with dread. She loved him with all her heart, but could she really face the fallout? Would she be able to survive if she lost everything she had known, even if it meant gaining Lucas's love? It was the morning after a tense dinner, one where Eleanor had barely spoken to Lucas or Amara, her coldness suffocating the air. Amara stood in the kitchen, trying to focus on her work. She had been serving the Whitmore family for years, but today felt different. The usual routine felt like a cage, each movement under Eleanor's scrutinizing eye a reminder of how little she mattered in this world. Just then the door opened, and Eleanor strode in, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. The smile that graced her lips was forced, a mask to conceal the brewing storm inside. "Amara," she said, her voice syrupy sweet but edged with malice. "I think we need to have a little chat." Amara's heart raced as she set down the dish she was holding, trying to calm the rising tension within her. "What is it, Mrs. Whitmore?" Eleanor's eyes narrowed as she stepped closer. "I know what you and my son have been up to. This little romance of yours, this fantasy you've been living. You think you can just walk in here, wear that necklace, and think you belong? You think that you can tear my family apart?" Amara stood her ground, though her hands were trembling. "I'm not trying to tear anything apart, Mrs. Whitmore. I never wanted any of this. I just wanted to love your son." Eleanor scoffed, her face twisting with disdain. "Love? What could you possibly offer him that I can't? You're a maid, Amara. A servant. And that's all you will ever be. So I suggest you remember your place, before I make it clear to everyone exactly what you are." Amara's breath caught in her throat, but she refused to let Eleanor see the fear that threatened to overtake her. "I love Lucas. And he loves me. And if you think you can break us apart, you're wrong. No matter what you do, we will stay together." Eleanor laughed, a cruel, harsh sound that seemed to shake the walls. "You're delusional." She took a step closer, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You will never be accepted here. You'll never be good enough for him. And if you don't leave voluntarily, I'll make sure you're out of this house by the end of the week." Later that evening, Lucas found himself pacing the floor of his study. His father had offered his support, but what about Amara? What if Eleanor pushed too far? What if Amara couldn't handle the pressure? His thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. "Come in," Lucas called, his voice strained. The door creaked open, and Amara stepped in, her face drawn and pale. "Lucas," she said softly, her voice wavering. "We need to talk." Lucas immediately crossed the room, his heart aching at the sight of her. He had never seen her so fragile. "Amara, what's wrong?" He reached for her hand, pulling her into a gentle embrace. "I can't do this anymore, Lucas. I can't keep living in fear, in hiding. Your family will never accept me. Your mother will never accept us. I can't be the one to destroy everything for you." Her words tore through him, but he refused to let her go. "You're not destroying anything. You're the one I want. You're the one I've always wanted." Amara shook her head, pulling away slightly. "I love you, Lucas. But I can't stay here and let your family tear us apart. I can't keep pretending that things will magically get better." Lucas took a deep breath, steeling himself. He had always feared disappointing his family, feared the consequences of defying them. But tonight, something inside him shifted. "I'm not choosing between you and them anymore, Amara. I'm choosing you. I want a future with you, and if that means leaving this all behind, then so be it." The next morning, Lucas sat at the kitchen table, a piece of paper in front of him. He knew what he had to do, what he had already decided. His hand hovered over the paper, the words he needed to say coming with difficulty. "I'm stepping down as CEO," he wrote. "I can't live for a family that won't accept the woman I love." As he finished the letter, he folded it neatly and walked over to where Amara stood, her back to him. When she turned, he placed the letter in her hand. "This is for us, Amara. No more hiding. No more fear." Amara looked down at the paper, her eyes filling with tears. But these were different tears, not of pain but of hope. "Are you sure?" Lucas nodded, his face resolute. I've never been more sure of anything in my life." The days following Lucas's decision were filled with tension, a mix of freedom and fear that weighed heavily on both him and Amara. For the first time in years, Lucas felt unburdened, free from the expectations of his family. Yet, with this newfound freedom came the reality of the life he was choosing, a life without the security and comfort his family's wealth had provided. The path ahead was uncertain, but it was a path he was willing to walk if it meant being with Amara. In the days that followed, Eleanor's wrath was unrelenting. Lucas had never seen her so angry. She had always been the controlling force in the Whitmore family, the one who orchestrated every event, every decision. But now, as Lucas rejected her vision for his future, she was unraveling. The cold, calculated matriarch of the Whitmore family had become a woman desperate to regain control, desperate to keep her family's name intact at any cost. One afternoon, Eleanor entered Lucas's study, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. She didn't knock, didn't wait for permission. The door swung open, and there she stood, framed by the threshold, her face tight with fury. "You think you can just walk away from this?" Eleanor's voice was a low hiss, filled with venom. "You think you can just throw away everything I've built for you? The Whitmore name, the legacy, the empire, all of it gone. All because of her." Her eyes flashed toward Amara, who was standing behind Lucas, her hands nervously clasped together. "You've made your choice, Lucas," Eleanor continued, her tone hardening. "But don't think for a second that I will let you destroy this family." Lucas stood tall, his jaw clenched, but there was no fear in his eyes. "I'm not destroying the family, Mom. I'm choosing my own path. I'm choosing Amara. You've spent my entire life telling me who I should be, but I'm done. I can't live for you anymore." Eleanor took a step forward, her voice now trembling with anger. "You think she's worth it? You think she'll be able to stand by you when everything falls apart? She's nothing more than a maid, Lucas. Nothing more than a servant. She'll never fit in with our world. And you'll regret this." Amara felt the weight of Eleanor's words press down on her, but she refused to shrink away. "You don't know me, Eleanor. You don't know what I'm capable of, or what Lucas and I are building. I'm not going anywhere, and neither is he." There was a long tense silence between them, broken only by the soft tick of the clock on the wall. Then, Eleanor turned, her eyes full of hatred. "You've made a grave mistake, Lucas. And I'll make sure you pay for it." With that, she left the room, her words hanging in the air like a curse. That evening, Lucas and Amara sat in the living room, the weight of Eleanor's threats heavy in the room. It was clear that Eleanor wouldn't back down, and her anger would only escalate. But Lucas wasn't going to let her win. He had made his choice, and he wasn't turning back. Just as they were lost in their thoughts, the door opened, and Edward Whitmore, Lucas's father, stepped into the room. His face was serious, but there was a hint of something softer in his eyes. Lucas looked up, surprised to see him. "Dad," Lucas said, his voice uncertain. Edward nodded, then turned his gaze to Amara, his expression softer than it had ever been. "I know things have been difficult," he began, his voice deep and steady. "I know I haven't always been there for you, Lucas. But I want you to know that I'm proud of you. You've made the right choice." Amara looked up at Edward, unsure of how to react. This was a side of him she hadn't seen before. "But your mother, she'll never accept us," she said softly. "She won't stop until she drives us apart." Edward sighed, sitting down across from them. "I know Eleanor. She's always been controlling, always believed her vision for this family was the only one that mattered. But I've realized that my son's happiness is more important than anything else. If she's going to fight against you, Lucas, then I'll stand with you. I'll support you, and I'll help you both build the future you deserve." Lucas felt a wave of relief wash over him, but there was still a heavy burden on his heart. "Thank you, Dad. I don't know what I'd do without you." Edward smiled faintly. "You don't have to do it alone. And neither does Amara. The road ahead won't be easy, but I believe in both of you. And I'm here to help, however I can." Later that night, Amara stood at the window, staring out at the mansion's sprawling grounds. The lights of the estate glowed softly in the distance, but it all felt so far away. She had never imagined a life like this, one filled with such uncertainty, but also one where she could finally stand up for herself. Eleanor had tried to tear her down, to break her, but Lucas and now Edward had shown her a different way. Lucas approached her from behind, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "Are you okay?" Amara turned to face him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "I'm scared, Lucas. I don't know what's going to happen. But I can't keep running from her, from all of this." She paused, her voice steadying. "I want to fight for us. I want to fight for you." Lucas smiled softly, pulling her into his arms. "Then we'll fight together. Whatever comes, we'll face it as one." Do you think Lucas and Amara will be able to overcome Eleanor's cruelty? How do you think their fight for love will unfold? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more emotional stories like this. Hit the bell icon so you won't miss the next chapter of their journey. The days that followed Lucas's decision were the hardest of his life. As his mother, Eleanor, continued her relentless campaign to tear him apart, his resolve only grew stronger. But the family he had known for so long was fracturing before his eyes. His father's support had given him the strength to stand up to his mother, but the weight of his choices was beginning to feel too heavy to bear. Meanwhile, Amara was feeling the full brunt of the Whitmore family's disdain. Eleanor had never stopped her subtle but cutting remarks, and now, with Lucas making his choice clear, Amara found herself at the center of it all. Each day was filled with moments of fear, not just for herself, but for the future she and Lucas hoped to build together. Would it all fall apart under the pressure? Was it worth it? But with Edward's quiet support, Lucas and Amara found themselves holding on to each other, relying on their love and the hope of a future free from the Whitmore family's control. A few days after Eleanor's last confrontation, Lucas was sitting in the study, going over the documents for the company. Despite the chaos at home, the business still needed attention, but his mind was elsewhere. He couldn't shake the image of Amara's tear-streaked face from their earlier conversation. He knew he was doing the right thing, but the guilt of putting her through all this weighed on him heavily. The sound of a knock on the door broke his thoughts. He looked up to find Eleanor standing in the doorway, her arms crossed, an icy expression on her face. "We need to talk," she said, her voice cold and emotionless. Lucas didn't move, his gaze hardening. "About what, Mom?" "I've made my choice. There's nothing more to say." Eleanor stepped into the room, shutting the door behind her. "You think you can just walk away from this family and face no consequences?" Her voice was low, dangerous. "I warned you, Lucas. If you choose her, you lose everything. Your legacy, your future, gone. You'll never have a place in this family again. Do you really want that?" Lucas stood from his desk, moving towards her. "I don't want to lose my family, but I can't keep living for you. I'm not going to pretend I don't love Amara anymore. This is who I am, and I won't apologize for it." Eleanor's face tightened with fury. "Then you're a fool. If you want to walk away from everything I've built for you, so be it. But I won't let this go. I'll make sure everyone knows the truth. I'll expose you both for what you really are." Lucas's heart raced. "If you want to do that, then go ahead. But you won't tear us apart." "Then we're done," she spat, turning on her heel and leaving the room, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floors. Later that night, Amara sat alone in the kitchen, her head resting against her hand, exhausted from the emotional toll the day had taken. She had always been strong, never letting anyone see how deeply the cruelty of the Whitmore family hurt her. But lately, it was becoming too much to bear. She had given everything to Lucas, but it seemed that every step forward brought with it another obstacle, another attack from his family. The soft sound of footsteps behind her made her look up. Lucas stood in the doorway, his expression soft, his eyes filled with concern. "Amara," he said gently, walking over to her. "I know things are hard right now, but I need you to know that I won't stop fighting for us. I won't let my family win." Amara looked up at him, her eyes red from the tears she had fought to keep hidden. "Lucas, I don't know how much more I can take. Your mother, your family, they won't stop. I'm scared. I'm scared for us. I'm scared of losing you." Lucas knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. "You won't lose me. Not ever. But we have to keep fighting. We have to stay strong. If we don't, we lose everything we've worked for." Amara shook her head. "I don't want to lose you, Lucas. But I can't live in this fear every day. What if we can't make it? What if I can't handle the pressure of being in this world? I've spent my life hiding from it, and now I'm forced to stand up to it." Lucas leaned in, brushing a strand of hair from her face. You're stronger than you think, Amara. I know you are. And we'll face this together. You and me, we'll fight for the future we want. For the life we deserve. Her breath caught in her throat as his words sank in. For the first time, she felt a sense of hope, a light in the darkness that she hadn't felt before. I want that future, Lucas. I want it with you. But I can't keep living like this. I need to know that we can be free, that we can have a life without the shadows of your family hanging over us. The next morning, Lucas and Amara stood together in the garden, the sun rising on the horizon. Lucas held Amara's hands, his gaze unwavering. I'm stepping down, he said, his voice strong. I'm leaving everything behind. This company, this legacy. It's not what I want. What I want is you. And I want a life with you, one free from the chains of my family's control. Amara's eyes widened. She hadn't expected him to go this far. Lucas, are you sure? This is everything. This is your future. He nodded, his expression resolute. I don't care about the future they've planned for me. I care about the future I want with you. We'll build something new, something real. Together. Amara's heart swelled with emotion, tears filling her eyes as she threw her arms around him. You're all I've ever wanted, Lucas. I'll follow you, wherever you go. The day Lucas made his decision to step down from a family business was the day the world changed. The Whitmore mansion, which had been a symbol of privilege, power, and control, now felt like a distant memory. As Lucas and Amara left the life they had known, a sense of both fear and excitement gripped them. They didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, they were facing it on their own terms. The first few days were difficult. They had no company to run, no estate to manage. Lucas had to break the news to his father, Edward, who had been supportive but still wary of what would happen next. But Edward, ever the pragmatic businessman, offered his assistance in helping Lucas and Amara start fresh. One morning, as Amara stood by the window of their new apartment, a small, modest space compared to the grandeur of the Whitmore mansion, she realized just how much had changed. She wasn't the same woman who had walked into the Whitmore household years ago, scared of her place in the world. She wasn't the same woman who had accepted the life she'd been given. Now, with Lucas by her side, she was ready to build a life they could call their own. Lucas walked into the room, a stack of papers in his hands. He had been working with Edward to secure a small business venture, something they could call their own, something separate from the Whitmore legacy. The new venture was risky, but Lucas was willing to take the chance. The risk was worth it if it meant he could build a future with Amara. I know we've been through a lot, Amara, Lucas said as he approached her, setting the papers down on the counter. But I've never felt more alive, more sure of what I want. And I want this, I want us together, building something new. Amara smiled softly, her heart swelling with love and gratitude. I want that too, Lucas. I want a life that's just ours. No more hiding, no more fear. Just us. The weight of the decision to walk away from everything was still there, but it was different now. They had each other, and that was enough. They were ready to face whatever came next together. One afternoon, just as they were settling into their new life, the doorbell rang. Amara opened the door to find Eleanor standing on the doorstep. Her expression was cold, but there was something more like resignation. Eleanor didn't speak right away, but the tension between them was palpable. Lucas isn't here, Amara said, stepping back to close the door, but Eleanor held it open. I need to speak to you, Eleanor said, her voice softer than usual, but still laced with disdain. I don't expect you to forgive me for what happened, Amara, but I think you deserve to hear the truth. Amara looked at her, her heart racing. The truth about what? Eleanor hesitated, taking a deep breath. I don't approve of what you and Lucas have done. But I know he loves you. I see that now. And maybe, just maybe, I've been too hard on both of you. Amara stood still, unsure of how to respond. The woman who had humiliated her, who had torn her blouse in front of everyone, was now standing here, offering an apology. But Amara wasn't sure it was enough. You've caused a lot of pain, Amara said quietly, her voice steady. And I won't forget that. But I know that Lucas and I made the right choice. We're not looking back anymore. Eleanor nodded, her lips tight, but she didn't argue. I understand. For the first time, Eleanor turned and walked away, leaving Amara standing in the doorway. It wasn't a happy ending, but it was a start. A start toward healing, toward moving on. As the weeks passed, Lucas and Amara began to build their future, brick by brick. They started a small business together, with Edward's help, and while the challenges were many, they were ready. The weight of Eleanor's influence still loomed, but Lucas and Amara knew they had each other. They knew their love was stronger than the chains of the past. One night, as they sat on their small balcony, watching the city lights twinkle below, Amara turned to Lucas. "Do you ever think about the life we left behind?" she asked. Lucas looked out at the horizon, his arm around her. "I do. But I think we've finally found the life we were meant to have." Amara smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "We may have lost everything, but we've gained so much more." What do you think about Lucas and Amara's decision to walk away from everything for their love? Do you think they can truly build a life free from the Whitmore family's control? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more emotional and gripping stories like this one. Hit the bell icon so you never miss a new chapter of their journey.